Claire and David Halston were the couple everyone envied, charming, successful, and inseparable. But beneath their picture-perfect life was a secret so dark it would unravel everything. When a buried lie surfaced in the form of a missing man and a hidden file titled Claire's Deal, the question was no longer who betrayed whom, but how long had the betrayed whom planned. Everyone in Maple Hollow knew Claire and David Halston. They were the kind of couple people described with quiet envy, graceful, successful, and inseparable. At every holiday party, every school fundraiser, every charity gala, they were always together. David, the affable high school English teacher with a bright laugh and warm eyes, and Claire, the poised interior designer who seemed to float through rooms with a kind of effortless elegance. Their marriage was often held up as an example by friends, and neighbors, even by strangers who only knew them through social media. The Iyer home was perched at the edge of the historic district, an immaculately restored Victorian with white shutters and flower boxes that bloomed year-round. It was the kind of house people slowed down to look at. Inside, everything was curated with taste. Books stacked just so, vintage record players, modern art. It was beautiful, but not sterile, lived in. Real on paper, there was no reason to question anything about the Halstons. 9 years married, no children yet. But they said they were still figuring out the timing. Claire's design business had grown into something of a local empire. Clients in multiple states, a feature in a national magazine, even a few celebrity homes under her belt. David, meanwhile, had become something of a beloved figure at the local high school. Students described him as someone who actually listened. Parents said he gave them hope. They were the kind of people who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten thank-you notes, hosted New Year's Eve parties with perfectly chosen wine and soft jazz humming in the background. Everything about them seemed safe, secure, and just right. And yet, beneath the veneer of perfection there were small things, quiet, easily dismissed things, like how Claire started coming to parties alone more often in the past year, how David's car, usually pristine, now had a long scratch on the driver's side that he never bothered to fix, or how Claire's sister mentioned, offhandedly, that Claire had stopped talking about the future. "They used to plan everything," she said once. "Now she avoids the topic like it's cursed." No one pushed too hard, though. People don't question a fairy tale when it's playing out in front of them, especially not when it gives them something to aspire to. But behind closed doors something was shifting. Claire had always been the more organized of the two. She handled the bills, the calendar, the taxes. David was content to let her take care of those things. "She's just better at it," he'd joke. Except, a few months before their 10th anniversary, Claire started noticing oddities. A strange notification from their joint savings account, a bounced auto payment that made no sense. She assumed it was a bank error at first. Those happen, no big deal. Still, it nagged at her. Claire prided herself on precision, on knowing where every dollar went, every appointment was scheduled, every contract signed. She began double-checking things, balancing accounts late at night while David slept in the other room. What she found was unsettling. There were discrepancies, small at first, $50 here, $100 there, then larger. Withdrawals she didn't authorize, transfers she didn't initiate, and all of it buried deep in statements she normally would have caught, but hadn't. Not until now. She didn't mention it to David, not right away. Instead, she told herself it was probably just a miscommunication, something she forgot, something she'd agreed to in passing and lost track of. But each time she looked closer, more questions surfaced, and slowly a pit began to grow in her stomach. Was he hiding something? Had someone gotten into their accounts? Or, worse, was David in trouble? She found herself staring at him longer, across the dinner table, watching his eyes, his hands, the rhythm of his words. Nothing seemed off. And yet everything felt off, like a painting that looks beautiful from a distance, but reveals cracks up close. Claire had built her life on control, order, and trust. And now, with no warning, one of those pillars was starting to shake. She didn't know it yet, but that small unease, the quiet realization that something wasn't quite right, was the first ripple of a storm that would leave their perfect life in ruins. Claire had always trusted her instincts, and now they were screaming at her. The financial inconsistencies weren't isolated incidents, they were becoming a pattern. What started as a single bank alert quickly multiplied. Each time she logged into their accounts, she found new transactions that didn't belong. Large ATM withdrawals in the early morning hours, transfers to unfamiliar accounts, odd payments to companies she had never heard of. She kept quiet, compiling a list of everything suspicious. She didn't want to believe that David was behind it. Her mind entertained a dozen other possibilities: identity theft, a banking error, some kind of fraudulent activity by an outsider. It was easier to believe a stranger was stealing from them than to accept that her husband might be hiding something. But the facts didn't support those hopes. The money wasn't vanishing all at once. It was dripping away, slow and calculated, almost like someone was trying not to draw attention. Claire began to notice that David had grown more withdrawn. He was still friendly, still wore that easy smile he was known for, but there was something beneath it now, a nervous edge. He checked his phone more often, left the room to take calls, and spent hours in the den with the door closed, claiming to be grading papers. He started testing him, casually asking about the household bills or their savings, bringing up the mortgage or a recent trip. He always answered with confidence, but his words didn't always match what she'd seen in the numbers. There was a gap, small but unmistakable, between what he said and what she knew, and that gap was growing. One night, unable to sleep, Claire sat at the kitchen table with her laptop open and every financial document she could find spread out before her: bank statements, credit card bills, investment summaries, some going back years. She organized them into categories, cross-referenced each charge, marked inconsistencies in red. Hours passed, unnoticed. By sunrise, her heart was racing. The total amount missing was nearly $48,000, 0 cents. A staggering figure that left her nauseous. It hadn't disappeared all at once. It had been taken in careful increments, hidden among ordinary expenses. The precision of it chilled her. This wasn't someone being careless. This was someone planning. When she finally confronted David, she expected panic or denial. Instead, he was calm, too calm. He told her it was for an investment, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity he didn't want to spoil by revealing too soon. His voice was steady, his explanation rehearsed. He promised it would all be worth it soon. Claire didn't believe him. She didn't say so at the time. She nodded, pretending to be reassured. But the moment he left the room, she felt a cold certainty settle inside her. He was lying. And if he was lying about this, what else had he lied about? That's when she decided to take the next step. If David wasn't going to give her the truth, she would find it on her own. A friend from college had once hired a private investigator to uncover her husband's affair. Claire had always thought that kind of thing was dramatic, something desperate people did when they didn't trust their gut. Now she understood. Trust could vanish in a moment, and once it did, instinct was all you had. The investigator she hired worked discreetly. Within days he began sending her quiet updates. Nothing explosive at first, just patterns, surveillance footage of David at unfamiliar locations, records of meetings with people whose names Claire didn't recognize. A few days later, a deeper truth began to emerge, cryptic but undeniable. David wasn't being scammed. He was actively involved in something secret, something financial, something that he was hiding with care. The investigator promised more answers were coming. Claire felt her world narrowing, each revelation tightening around her like a noose. The man she had built a life with, planned a future with, slept beside for 9 years, he was not the man she thought she knew, and, as she would soon learn, his secrets ran far deeper than missing money. The private investigator's final report arrived in a slim, black envelope. Claire stared at it for a long time before opening it, her heart pounding so loudly she could hardly hear her own breath. She was alone in her office, blinds drawn, her phone silenced. The air felt heavy, like something terrible was about to crawl out of those pages. Inside were photographs, email transcripts, surveillance logs, and financial traces. David hadn't just made a bad investment. He had built an alternate life, under a false name, Marcus Levinson. He had been deeply involved in a group that operated through anonymous online forums, masquerading as an exclusive cryptocurrency investment club. But it wasn't legitimate. The group's true function was far darker, a pyramid-like scheme that lured members with promises of enormous payouts, only to siphon funds through layered accounts and vanish before law enforcement could catch up. David had joined almost 2 years ago. His activity had ramped up, slowly at first, small trades and digital currency conversions. But 6 months ago, it escalated. He'd become a moderator in the group's private server, an administrator of sorts. That's when the real money started flowing out of their accounts. Claire realized with sick clarity that this wasn't just deception. This was criminal. What stunned her most was how ordinary everything had seemed while it was happening. David would wake up early, make her coffee, kiss her cheek, and go off to work. He'd talk about his students, their weekend plans, the mundane details of suburban life. All the while, he was laundering money through anonymous wallets, wiring cash to international accounts, and coaching others on how to cover their tracks. The investigator had even managed to dig up conversations between David and a man named Joel Reese. Joel, according to the report, was one of the original architects of the scheme. His name didn't appear in any legal databases under criminal charges, but there were whispers about him in cybersecurity forums. He was known for walking the edge of legality, always one step ahead of being caught. The messages between David and Joel were cryptic but revealing. They discussed market manipulation, staged sell-offs, fake testimonials. Claire sat there, stunned, reading the words over and over again. At one point, Joel warned David to keep his house in order. A chilling phrase that now felt like more than just financial advice. Then came the most alarming part. The group had come under federal investigation. The report mentioned sealed indictments, an FBI task force, and a pending series of raids. Claire realized the clock was ticking. If David didn't come clean, he would be caught, and possibly drag her down with him. But before she could confront him again, the authorities acted. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. Claire was at a client's home reviewing fabric swatches when her phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. It was the FBI. They had arrested David at school, in front of students and staff. He'd been taken into custody for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit financial crimes, and obstruction of justice. By the time Claire rushed home, their house was already being searched. Sentinels swarmed the living room, sorting through files, taking computers, digging into every drawer and cabinet. One of them handed her a search warrant. Her name wasn't on it, but their eyes lingered on her longer than she was comfortable with. In the days that followed, the news broke. Local papers ran headlines like, "Respected teacher arrested in crypto crime ring," and "Maple Hollow power couple implodes." Claire stopped answering her phone. She didn't respond to texts. Friends and clients dropped away, unsure what to believe. But something inside her told her this was only the surface. The money, the false identity, the crypto ring. They were just pieces of a much larger puzzle. Joel Reese had vanished 3 months earlier. No one knew where he went. David never mentioned him again after that final exchange. Claire couldn't shake the feeling that his disappearance wasn't a coincidence. And soon, she'd find out just how far David's secrets went. The headlines hadn't even cooled when something new shattered the remnants of Claire's world. With David in custody and his digital trail under federal scrutiny, the FBI turned their attention to the Halston home. It wasn't just about tracing financial records anymore. They were looking for hidden devices, backup drives, anything that might explain how deep David's crimes went. Claire had already moved out by then, staying at a friend's condo across town. She hadn't stepped foot back in the house since the arrest. The place that once felt like a dream, the clean white walls, curated artwork, and perfect symmetry, now felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by questions she couldn't answer. That's when the call came. A federal agent informed her they were expanding their search to the property's grounds. Routine, they said. Claire agreed without protest. There was nothing left to protect. 2 days later, she received a second call. This one was different. The voice on the other end was calm, but Claire could hear the shift in tone. Something had changed. Beneath the garden shed, buried under 2 feet of compacted soil, agents had found a body. At first, the details were sparse. Claire tried to process the words: remains, shallow grave, forensic team. The shed had been David's personal project, a space he'd built himself the previous summer, obsessing over the design and layout. He told Claire he needed a quiet space for grading papers, somewhere to think. She had laughed at the time, joking that he just wanted a man cave. But now it took on a far darker meaning. The remains were male. Decomposition had advanced, but dental records soon confirmed the identity. Joel Reese. The same Joel David had been communicating with in secret. The same man who had vanished without a trace months ago. The moment the news broke, the narrative shifted again. David Halston wasn't just a con man with a double life. He was now the prime suspect in a murder investigation. Claire's phone rang non-stop. Reporters, former clients, friends, even distant relatives, all wanting answers she didn't have. Or maybe they just wanted to hear her voice shake, to confirm that the woman who once seemed to have everything was now standing in the middle of a nightmare. The FBI didn't arrest her, not yet, but they questioned her again and again. What did she know about Joel Reese? Had she ever met him? Did she help David move the body? How could she live with a man capable of murder and not suspect anything? Claire had no answers that satisfied them. What haunted her most wasn't the presence of the body. It was how close it had been all along. She had stood on that shed's porch drinking coffee. She had hosted a garden party just yards away, and beneath it all, Joel Reese had been hidden, like a secret David never planned to share. But the most disturbing revelation was still to come. During their forensic sweep of the house, agents uncovered a locked external hard drive hidden behind a false wall in David's office. It took days to decrypt. When they did, they found something unexpected, not just financial records or illegal transactions, but personal ones, journal entries, digital notes, passwords, and among them a file titled Claire's Deal. It wasn't just incriminating, it was damning. Suddenly, the investigation wasn't focused solely on David. The tone of the questioning changed. The agents looked at Claire differently now, not just as a witness or an unsuspecting wife, but as a possible accomplice. They asked her to explain the file. She claimed she didn't know anything about it. They didn't press. Yet. But their silence said enough. In their eyes, Claire Halston was no longer just collateral damage. She might have been part of the story all along. Claire sat in the sterile, windowless interview room for what felt like hours. The file, titled Claire's Deal, had turned everything upside down. What the FBI had once seen as a tale of a woman betrayed now shimmered with the possibility of something more complex, more dangerous. The investigators asked their questions with a new edge, a subtle change in tone, not accusatory, not yet, but suspicious, curious in the way predators are curious just before they strike. The contents of the file were unsettling. It detailed her routine, passwords she had once used and since changed, notes about her client meetings, dates of deposits she'd made into their joint accounts. The file even included a hypothetical risk scenario. What to do if Claire suspects too much? That line alone chilled her to the bone. It wasn't just a log. It was a plan, a contingency, a blueprint for controlling the narrative if Claire ever got too close to the truth. Someone had been preparing for her betrayal long before she'd even considered it. For days afterward, Claire didn't sleep. She combed through every memory with David, re-examining the last 2 years, his mood swings, his sudden trips, the way he'd distracted her with affection or blamed stress from school. It wasn't random. It was orchestrated. Then came the trial. David's legal team argued that Joel Reese had been the mastermind, that David had only followed his lead. They claimed David had acted in self-defense after Joel threatened to expose the entire operation, potentially putting Claire in danger. They portrayed him as desperate, scared, and protective of his wife. It was a clever defense, emotional, manipulative, and the media ate it up. Headlines now read, "Was it murder or panic?" and "Husband claims he killed to save his marriage." Suddenly, people weren't sure what to believe. The perfect marriage had become a stage and everyone had a front row seat, but Claire knew better. She hadn't needed saving. She needed answers. What the jury didn't know, what the FBI was still quietly investigating, was the second hard drive. Claire had found it herself while gathering what few personal items she was allowed to take from the house. It was tucked behind a false bottom in her bedside drawer, cleverly disguised as an old travel adapter. Inside were more files, hidden backups of David's correspondence. But these were different. They revealed transactions made not just in David's name, but Claire's. There were forged emails, contracts bearing her signature, fake invoices linking her business to shell companies traced back to the investment ring. It was a setup. If David went down, he planned to drag her with him. Or worse, leave her holding the bag if he managed to disappear. Claire handed the drive over to the FBI without hesitation. That's when the tone shifted again, not publicly, but behind closed doors. The prosecutors quietly removed her from the witness list. The late-night phone calls from investigators stopped. David was convicted on multiple charges: fraud, conspiracy, obstruction, and second-degree murder. The jury didn't buy the self-defense argument. He was sentenced to life, with the possibility of parole in 30 years. But for Claire, there was no real relief, because even with him behind bars, questions remained. Why keep such detailed records? Why plan for her involvement so far in advance? And most disturbing of all, was she really the target of a calculated cover-up? Or had David always seen her as part of the game? Claire moved away after the trial, changed her name, started over, but sometimes she still receives strange emails from encrypted domains, messages with no content, just subject lines that say things like, "You were never supposed to find it," or "The deal isn't done." She deletes them, but each one leaves her wondering how much of her life was real, how much was manufactured. And if David wasn't acting alone, who else knew the truth? The perfect marriage didn't just collapse. It was dismantled, deliberately, piece by piece, until one lie turned it all to dust. And that lie, Claire now believes, was only the beginning.